Welcome to another episode of Inside the Barrel, where Jon and I talk about consulting life, deep diving into ServiceNow, and trying to answer all the questions that you guys have. Today, we are joined with two guests that I'll let them introduce themselves. And while they're introducing themselves, I have one of two questions you could answer. First one is, if you had to dye your hair to charity, what color would it be? Or if you got one of those Star Trek replicators, what's the first thing you would replicate? So Bryce, if you want to take us away.
Oh man. Hey everybody, I'm Bryce Jelinas. I'm a platform engineer with ServiceNow work. I specialize in Service Portal. I've been working in Service Portal since Helsinki, so however long that's been, 6 or so years, maybe more. And I guess, oh man, if I had a replicator, as lazy as this is, my PS5 is awesome, but it's downstairs, and I want one upstairs too.
Yeah, solid first choice.
So maybe that. Yeah, that's it for me.
Awesome.
I'm Zach Fanning. I'm a certified master architect working at Cask, and I thought you were going to go the exact same direction I was going. I'm not familiar with the replicator's rules, but I would 100% replicate myself. And do my job.
Wouldn't work in the Star Trek realm.
Yeah. You also clearly haven't watched oh man, what's that, the magic show?
Multiplicity?
No, the oh well. I'll think of it in a second and shout it out.
Because if you've seen Multiplicity, things get bad as you multiply yourself. They get progressively less smart.
That's okay. If 80% me gets fired, I mean, I'll just know limitations.
It's like the Rick and Morty episode where they like keep pressing the button to replicate.
The Mr. Meeseeks buddy.
Mr. Meeseeks, yeah. From Costco or Kirkland edition.
Yeah.
So, cool.
Oh, great.
All right. So today's topic is really about out of the box. One of the people at Cask recently asked Jon and I, like, can you do an episode on what out of the box means? And I really love this topic because I have different opinions from like most people that I've worked with on what out of the box is. And I think like even salespeople, when they say out of the box, like it's different than what delivery does when they implement. So I'd like to go around, and if you could give a sentence of what you think out of the box means in the context of ServiceNow, I would love to start that as the conversation and then shift into some other things. So Jon or Bryce, you want to hit us with it first?
No, I'll let Jon go first.
Yeah.
I think, as a portal guy, I think out of the box means I don't have to do any, and I hesitate to say code changes because CSS is code, but there's a different differentiator there where I don't have to clone a widget or do like everything but CSS changes. If all I'm doing is throwing a layer of CSS on top of it, that's out of box to me. And the only reason I know that right now is because I'm on a project where it's all out of box and it's all styles and there's some tricky stuff going on. I don't want to touch code,
Cool.
So
what about you, Zach? We'll go Zach and then you, Bryce.
Sounds good.
I'd say out of the box is when ServiceNow hands me the instance.
All right.
Like there's a lot of things you can do that are, because what we're concerned about is like a customization, right? We want to avoid things that are hard to maintain. We want to avoid things that cause technical debt. So it's like there's a lot of things you can do there with like on the configuration side. But as soon as you start getting in a bunch of custom code or custom app development, I mean, obviously, any custom app is not out of box. So, it kind of limits where you can go if you're strictly out of box, I'd say.
The way you guys are talking about out of the box sounds like you hate it. Or sorry, talking about customizing sounds like you hate it. 90% of my job is customizing stuff. So maybe I'm in the wrong room. No, I'm just,
yeah, but when you customize, it becomes out of box. That's the difference.
Not always. Maybe a little bit, but no. But to me, out of the box, I think Zach kind of touched on this too a little bit. It's everything. It's not even just Portal. Everything in ServiceNow to some extent is configurable how it comes. And I think when you're using those configurations, you're staying within out of the box. But if the need expands or it needs to be focused differently than what's available there, then companies and other people can go and configure or change, add their own configurations or just clone and edit, functionality as a whole, or create their own custom app, if they want. So that's when you kind of step out of the box. But as long as you're working within those configurations and things, wherever you're at in the ServiceNow platform, then in my opinion, that's what out of the box means.
Gotcha. Yeah, my definition of out of the box is whenever my upgrade goes smoothly. That means that like if I get skip logs that I actually have to review, I've done something that's not out of the box. That's my opinion. And that kind of leads, I know, Zach, you mentioned that you went through the CMA, congrats on that. I recently went through the CTA one as well, and there was a slide on defining configuration versus customization versus personalization. And I actually have the knowledge article or the community post that kind of summarizes it. It's not exactly to what the slide was, but I couldn't find the slide right away. So I thought I would show this on screen, and we can kind of talk about it. And I also just lost where I was looking at it. So, wow, it's like, I guess I'll just spotlight this because I can't really see it. All right, so talks about customization as a feature or extension or modification of ServiceNow feature that requires custom coding, right? So that kind of makes sense in my mind. What's interesting here is some examples they talk about is ACLs and business rules, but like you don't need to write scripts for those. So I'm a little confused on whether that one falls in configuration or customization. But this question this person mentioned, like, does it affect future upgrades? That totally resonates with me on something that's customization. Then it's like they go into configuration where you want to change its behavior to address a business need. So like groups, assignment rules, these are just like super basic things that like you pretty much, I've never seen a client just want groups. All right, like you can start using your instance and we just need to configure groups, assignment groups, and you're done. And then the last one is around personalization, which is where, Jon, you touched on with like themes or like CSS styling. I think kind of could potentially go into here, but this is probably more focused on what they're talking about, like user preferences. So any initial thoughts on, the three of these?
When did the configuration business rules come out? Where you could do no code business rules. Was that because that post was written 4 years ago?
Yeah, and maybe
so I wonder.
Maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but the way I read that when I was talking about business rules is more of like, there are out of the box records and applications and things that have business rules that already exist. And, a customization would be going into one of those existing business rules and changing, their functionality or something, adding an event that triggers or something like that, more than just like compared to, what you're talking about, Jon, I think, which is the, like the almost filter style editor where you add your filters and you have predetermined actions and things or update a field and stuff. Yeah. But
I mean, even adding a new one, right?
Right.
Like if I just add one that deletes my incident every time it gets created, that's a pretty big customization. So.
But if you didn't write code, is it a configuration, right? Like maybe to address the business need, you're supposed to delete that incident. Like,
yeah. But if you add a new one, so this is an interesting thing about out of the box, and I think the context is what matters. Out of the box is such a large term, but in my opinion, if you're slapping another business rule upon a table that already exists and stuff, it's not going to get skipped if there's a core update to that application that comes through. It's just going to update everything. So in my opinion, that's not really breaking out of the box necessarily. You're just implementing your own. It's a configuration, in my opinion, on top of it compared to a customization.
Okay, so here's a question then, because I think something's changed recently with ServiceNow. Is it used to be that you wouldn't touch out-of-box scripts, right? You would create a new one and work with that. But now they are suggesting that you modify out-of-box scripts and instead of creating new ones.
I think there's context, to that. I think it depends on the script you're editing and stuff. Like, for we're both service portal guys, so we're very familiar with the SP entry script that you every single portal you
gotta just someone make a table, please.
Yeah, definitely haven't spent hours of my life trying to untangle what the heck. But yeah, so there's stuff like that where you're just gonna have to go in and edit and things. So but I think there's other stuff. I'm curious, like, do you have a specific example, Jon, or something?
I don't have a specific example. I just know it's changed. I think someone just asked the other day here at Cask about it, where they were saying, it used to be that you weren't supposed to touch any script that came with ServiceNow. You're supposed to write a new one, but then they kind of changed that, and some of the newer scripts are open and allow you to change them. And so I was just curious, on you guys' thoughts about that, as far as how that fits in with out of box.
Yeah, so I was trying to find that article specifically that, and I'll show it on, I can't find it exactly, but for anyone that doesn't know, if you go to your developer.servicenow.com, there is like guides, and one of the guides is, there are a lot of like technical best practices. Somewhere in one of these guides, that I don't remember which one, talks about what you're talking about, Jon, on like use ServiceNow's solution or like scripts, or let's say it's a business rule, use it and then modify it, and then when an upgrade comes, you'll get a skip log. For me, like, I don't want that. Like, I don't want any skip logs. I want 2 weeks after an upgrade to happen, like no skip logs, and then keep going. And so I would normally deactivate a BR rule if it like is conflicting. Like, just set it to inactive, don't change anything, clone it, create a new one, make my changes. And the main reason, BRs are a little bit different, but the main reason that I like doing that is, I don't know if you've ever done an upgrade where you've modified the SP portal, and then ServiceNow comes with something new on the SP portal, and now you're looking at row containers, you're looking at like instances, and like it's like gibberish, and you can't even like compare these two XMLs. And I spend hours trying to understand what it did.
Yeah. Well, that's from my point of view. I deal a lot with script includes, right? I like the idea of extending. That seems 100% way safer, because now you've just kind of shimmed in a way to talk to that out of box one, and you can extend the functionality outside of it without affecting it. And so the change to modifying out of box script seems a little, I don't know, backwards to me, because like you said, now you're going to get skip logs. With Portal, you're going to end up with weird stuff. But
so I tell people, if you ever need to make changes to the portal, like just clone it. Clone the portal record, clone the pages that you're going to work from, clone the widgets that you're going to even work on, because you don't want to do skip logs for those portals. And when you do get a new upgrade and they did make changes to the portal, you had a side-by-side, easy to view situation. If you modified it, like, you have to go to a PDI and like try to figure it out, and it doesn't work exactly the way your instance does. Like,
I think there's context there too, though. It's not a one size fits all type thing. I personally think if you're working in a portal, obviously I agree with you. You should clone the portal and things and stuff. But as far as the widgets go, if your need fits an out of the box widget, by all means, I support, like, you should do that. You shouldn't even clone the widget yet, because that way, when you do get upgrades and stuff, that widget will have the latest code. And then you don't have to do the whole dance of, recloning, remerging all your logic and things and stuff.
But that's a downside too, because now when you do an upgrade, I've seen where ServiceNow doesn't provide it in release notes. So you do an upgrade, you get the latest code, and now the client's like, where did this extra menu come from on the my ticket list, which actually happened. And so,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean that's true. That's why I say it's context. It really depends. If you're 100% sure, you are happy with the current state of that widget, and you want to clone it and keep it there and not necessarily have to worry about it. It's like updating your computer. If you don't care about those latest things and whatever your latest OS is, the trade-off is there might be bugs and stuff. I'm the kind of person who I always wait, I feel like half a year before actually upgrading my OS.
Bleeding edge. I'm on betas.
but it depends. That's what I'm saying. There's context. So as a developer, sometimes that OS will have something that I really want, and then I'll it's nice to be able to say, yeah, I absolutely want to be on the bleeding edge right away next month. So if that's your dev pace and what you're expecting, then maybe you don't want to clone. But otherwise, it's hard to go wrong with cloning. There's a lot more stuff that could go wrong if you try to not clone than if you do.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. Like, what about you, Zach? Anything in the CMA that they kind of talk to you about, like cloning or customizations?
I'm kind of on the side of I want it in the either. Well, so I like the extension points. That's not one. Thought two is I've always been like, oh, inactivate the records, make a copy, blah, blah, blah. I never really liked that because it leads to like over time in large instances, think about it, hundreds of script artifacts inactivated and no longer getting updated. It leads to craziness where you're like 10 layers of different like dependencies and you can't figure out like, hey, why doesn't this work? And like the nightmare of untangling that just is not like feasible. So it's better to bite the bullet. And to me, it's just kind of like best practice, right? If there's new functionality, then you should be updating your code on the release. Like it's just, you have to commit to that. And that requires larger teams and investment by, leadership. But right. Exactly. But it's like, you have a choice, right? It's like, it's a proactive approach versus a reactive in my mind. So
yeah, I guess the trouble that I've seen when it comes to upgrading is it's not predictable for how many changes you're going to have to review. So like if you have a schedule that says, all right, we have a window of when we can do the upgrade to minimize the amount of downtime for our constituents, then if you don't make modifications to those things, your upgrade's relatively safe because it's all your stuff that is being modified. But if one in San Diego's release versus Tokyo's release, like ServiceNow has decided to focus on completely different parts of the platform, like you may not even have the expertise around or available to review those skip logs because you made changes in those spaces.
I think it's you're right, but it kind of is what it kind of leads to, and I think is what maybe there's a better way of phrasing it. Like it's kicking the can.
Yeah.
If you don't have the expertise and you're like, but I've inactivated it, so I have clean upgrades until you don't, right? It's like until like 4 upgrades later and you're like, oh my God, nothing's working. Yeah. Like none of these features happen. Like, and then you're trying to figure out like, across how many dozens or hundreds of artifacts, whatever the case may be. And you're like, oh God, now where do I get the expertise to figure this out? Yeah. Or do I just say, okay, got to start reverting to out of box, or go, instead of doing it as like a, as it comes solution, you're like, okay, got to do it all at once now and guess, go down the list.
I think anybody who's used any sort of GitHub library or dependency or anything understands that's just the nature of web dev. Like at some point a library is going to update and you're going to have to go learn more about that library that you were depending on that you didn't necessarily care to know at some point. But I'm with Zach, like, it's just part of it. Like stuff changes and like it's better to, if you do want to be on the bleeding edge, it's better to just deal with the incremental changes when you can instead of kicking the can down the road. So I think that was well put, Zach.
Yeah. I was on a project where I had built a large portal 5-6 years ago. And it was before a lot of the new stuff in HR had come out, and we had done a lot of custom work there. And so guess who gets pinged 6 years later to say, hey, we haven't upgraded any of this because we get errors and we need it straightened out. And so
is that the really nice portal?
Yeah, that's a really nice portal. But I did it. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It was just simply just going through and mapping all the script includes, and then updating and cutting and pasting quite a bit. But you're right. It works until it doesn't, right? And so the problem was back then it was out of necessity to get what they wanted, what the client wanted to happen versus what was available.
Yeah, well, 6 years ago, Service Portal. When the documentation was on GitHub, it wasn't even on the site.
Right.
So definitely there. Like, I totally understand.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Jon. Like, so, like in my example, like 6 years ago, if you did extending script includes, you wouldn't have run into that issue because the original script include would have been upgraded, and if you clone the widget, it would have been using your script includes versus the ones that are out of the box. So in theory, the portal would have continued to work. They would have gotten 0 new features in 6 years.
Well, and that's what they didn't get. They didn't get any features because they didn't upgrade, because they'd run into a couple of errors here and there. And really what it was, I'm trying to remember exactly how much I had to change to get it updated. And it was very minimal, actually. Once I mapped it out and figured out where stuff was, it wasn't too bad. And then I was able to get probably 95% of everything back to out of box. And so now they can do upgrades. There's documented, okay, if when you upgrade, you're going to get this kind of error, just copy this and paste it back in after you accept it, and you're done. Right. So, but yeah, it was a big undertaking and quite scary when you first look at it.
And that actually sounds, to me, that sounds amazing, right? Like you took something that was a nightmare and made it much more manageable. It's like establishing process and writing down the tribal knowledge. And now it's like, I don't know, because it just sounds more manageable. Like instead of, oh my God, it's so scary to upgrade. It's just like, oh, no. We have this little playbook and maybe there'll be some things we have to figure out, but it's just not that big a deal.
Well, it was scary because they said they just hadn't done the updates for this particular, for HR in like 6 years. Yeah. And so it's like, wait, you haven't done anything?
Yeah. This is when I'd plug like ATFs and things and stuff. Like so having some sort of like playbook or test suite or something that you can refer to as you're upgrading on an application is super important. And I've seen a lot of companies and stuff that don't necessarily do that because it's a lot of, work up front, but I think it's totally worth it. And ATFs in the last couple of years, Zach probably knows more about this than me with ATFs, but the little I've used with them, they seem to have improved so much than, when I started using them a couple of years ago.
Jon and I did a podcast on that.
Oh, yeah.
We essentially showed how you can actually do code unit tests through ATF.
Yeah, exactly.
And like at least in San Diego, it's nice. Like you can debug, you can pause, like you put breakpoints. Like it is definitely evolved. But I will say there's still a learning curve, and like I think it's hard to say to an organization that's like, hey, go spend a few $1,000s now extra to build tests, as much as we want to build them.
Yeah, it's an investment. I don't disagree with that, but so is having to upgrade a something that's not been upgraded in 6 years.
Totally. Totally.
As far as ATF goes, like I'm in the, like it's very easy, I think, to sell it on the, do test what matters, right? Yeah, sure, you could boil the ocean and all that, but if you're like, hey, if this doesn't work, I will lose $10,000 a minute. Okay, you probably build a test around that, and just work your way down from there on like, where's your high ROI. I think that resonates with the business more than, hey, we need to build tests, because that probably, I guess there's where the CMA training comes in. Is I've learned, when I was communicating before, like, hey, we need tests, and maybe getting dismissed because I wasn't communicating in the right language, being able to say, hey, let's talk dollars and cents. Let's talk business value. Like, what's an outage look like? What's the impact? All of a sudden, it feels like, you get a lot more, like you're speaking the right language.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everything's about the user experience, I think, at the end of it. So, as developers and stuff, it's easy to get all into the technical of like why, from a coding philosophy standpoint, this is a good thing. But, ultimately, all that stuff really boils down to the user experience. So I think people want to hear that, like you can create ATFs around, like if you have a high profile user or client or something, making sure that their experience is smooth and all of that. And, that is really easy to prove. Like that's going to save you guys money because you know how much that user, that client, or whatever is bringing to your company or your implementation. So were you just going to say something, Dorian? And I cut you off.
No. It reminds me of, I used to work at TurboTax for Intuit, and and Brad Smith, the old CEO, would sometimes actually test the product, especially around like go live days. And if he found something, it would instantly get forwarded to like directors and SVPs, and then people would be like, "How did he find this?" And how did he found this?
I'm not sure that's a platform thing as much as a business thing, but
yeah, totally. But it brings up the like you just mentioned, like the high profile person going through something. Like if there's some unique use case and maybe their CEO's taxes are a little bit more complicated, that there should be some test around those kind of things if it's high profile. So it sounds like I'm being outvoted here, and that's totally fine on just modify the file, except if it's portal. I think I heard a little bit about like it's painful to just compare XMLs and portals. I don't think it's a problem to compare XMLs in business rules or even in widgets. It's probably relatively easy. I think that the downside is just the visual aspect of a portal, but it sounds like use what ServiceNow has, get the skip log, and then, spend the investment every 6 months to review skip logs if they're there.
And I don't necessarily think you're wrong and we're right or somebody else is right. I think there's a lot of nuance in every single implementation of ServiceNow, and no implementation is the same. Feel free to chime in, anybody else. But sometimes you just are never going to want to skip and you want to stay completely out of the box. And sometimes you need to write a whole custom app for whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also, the admin or the whoever's running the instance for that client or that company, it's whatever their adversion rate is or whatever the word is, how adverse are they to having to fix things? Some people will be like, yeah, I don't care. Let's do whatever we need to do and we'll worry about it later and work on it. And other people are like, I don't want any problems. I want 0 skip logs. I want a nice instance every time we upgrade. But you just don't get, really you lose out on what I think is the biggest selling point of ServiceNow is what you can do with it outside the box, So.
Yeah, I think people think like it's a off the shelf or it's a product that you buy and like it should be smooth, like always. And, because it's a platform of platforms or an application platform as a service, like there is, a lot of nuance there on, it's hard to say follow this rule every time until you don't.
Well, how many companies follow the rule? I mean, like, I worked on another project where their business rules had more exceptions than you could count. You know what I mean? Like it was like, oh yeah, we do it this way, except when we don't, and then we also don't do it that way always either. And you're like, well, okay, that's a lot of exceptions that we have to now build in, and so
yeah, best practices if you are going to go out of the box are super important. So there's lots of stuff. It's a powerful platform, with great power comes great responsibility. There are lots of stuff you could do to very quickly, easily code yourself into a corner. And to that point, I think a lot of times I've seen ServiceNow get marketed to people as it can do everything, it can do anything you want, which is true. But there's also business considerations to take into account for that. Like, you know, depending on what you're trying to do, it might take a lot of developers to do it. Or, you know, maybe it's a quick configuration. There's a lot of nuance. So it's like, it really depends.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Any other like comments on out of the box or you know, tips or tricks you've seen or instances you ran into that people should keep an eye out on?
Yeah, I mean, I think because I've worked a lot. This project I'm on right now, we're building like, you know, a kind of core application that, you know, should be extended upon and things. So I'm a little bit really familiar with, you know, trying to build something that's intended to be out of the box. And I think there's stuff, you know, you can look for and do and things with service portal widgets. I'm a really big fan of actually making the HTML template configurable. So instead of having a whole HTML template, I have a line in it that just embeds an Angular template, and then you can have those Angular templates be configurable by the client, if that makes sense. If I'm making sense, John. So, you know, they don't have to actually clone or touch the widget. They just edit, you know, the HTML and stuff, and can use the variables and things already applied. So you can, you know, so oftentimes you have coming in from a widget all the, you know, the records you want pulling in, or, you know, client script, whatever. It's just you want to be able to present it differently. You don't really want to be able to have to clone the whole widget to do it that way. You know, with out of the box widgets, you're kind of stuck with that because they have the HTML right in the HTML template. But, you know, if you are looking at trying to build your own kind of out of the box stuff with Portal, I recommend starting to look that route with the HTML, especially for clients that are low code that don't want to have to deal with everything else. You can just deal with the HTML. Sorry, you're going to say, John.
Well, I was just going to mention that's one sticking point with me is that it bothers me I can't have global templates. You know, they're per widget.
Don't get me started.
Because I would that makes total sense to me, is that to have a configurable template. But if I can't use it around the place, you know, if I have to keep recreating it every time, it drives me nuts.
_2 _3 all need unique IDs.
So true.
And I should really know the answer for sure, but I think the templates work by inheritance. So if your template is in like a parent widget, an Angular template, you can reference it from a child widget, and it won't get mad at you. I need to look at that again. I remember I accidentally discovered some sort of hack around it. So, you know, maybe you can put them all in the header. You probably should not do that because it's literally but
I've got 3,000 templates in the header.
See what I mean? Whoever's watching about coding yourself in a corner really fast, it is really easy. You just be like, what could go wrong? I'm just going to put all those Angular templates in there. But yeah.
No, awesome. No, I really appreciated it. Anything, Zach, John, any last words? Feeling good?
One thing to mention is, like, you know, I very much agree with John on, like, you know, leverage. You pay a lot of money for this platform. You should use it. You should get what you need out of it. You should find ways to deliver the ROI. And then the part where I think is just like, how do you figure out where the value is versus the risk? And it doesn't need to be overly complicated, right? We talk about this in CMA. It's like you could set up a little scale, right? 1 to 3 business value, low, medium, high, risk, low, medium, high. And you don't even need to talk about the things that are obvious. Yeah. Something
exactly.
Yeah.
Little scale here for this is also a ServiceNow deck.
Yep.
I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier. You know, there's a lot of times business considerations to make. You know, I think that's what Zach's getting at. Like, there's going to be risk, and it's something that you should definitely talk about before, you know, you end up neck deep and out of resources and stuck with something that you don't necessarily want,
or know how to continue. You know, there's a lot of clients that will be like, you know, I don't know that we have resources on staff that can take what you've given us and keep it alive, you know.
Right.
Going back to that big project 6 years ago, when I got my hands back on it recently, I still don't think they knew how to use it. You know, I built this giant portal. I made a very easy to use administration system on it, but I don't think they ever, and we had written documentation all around it. I just don't think they ever use it because they're like, oh yeah, we need all these images changed. I'm like, well, you just go here and add an image and you're done. But whatever, I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
And so, it's just one of those things where the company's going to have to look, you're right. The company's going to have to look to see, can we support these non out of box stuff now, or this out of box stuff? Because one admin is going to struggle trying to take care of a large corporation's instance that has any sort of customization in it.
Absolutely.
And then you build on that team and say, okay, well, what would it take? Well, here's your business value, right?
That reminds me, for my widgets, I try to put as much as I can in the option schema because I didn't want to build an admin page. And then I got to the point where they were like, how do I change this image? I'm like, you just go to the option schema. And they didn't even know like how to use the service portal config page. And it was just like, I was like, oh, like maybe we built something too complex for even them to use the out of the box stuff.
Yeah. Well, so mine was all based on back when, tables were free. And so I built, so there was like a bajillion tables that did all this admin stuff, and now I'm like, I can't build that anymore. I have to like tack on to other tables now. But yeah, option schemas are fun. I mean, you can do a lot there, but again, if your admin team doesn't know how to deal with that or even know that they exist, it makes no difference.
Yep. Yeah.
Bryce and I worked on a project back in the day that I remember thinking as we worked on it, I was like, they are never going to be able to maintain this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that project. I think it had to do with a massive. We were pretty much rewriting the entirety of the change application with.
Yes, we built a custom change portal, and
the way it was. Oh, sorry, you go for it. You say it, Zach.
Well, actually, you want to talk about? I was brought in. At one point.
Yeah, when I first showed up, it was pretty much just me and another third-party contractor. And the third-party contractor had built out, not throw them under the bus, but it was a massive. It was a widget with probably about 1,000 lines of code in the service script, and then in the client script, it was also massive, but all of it was using like event emitters. There's probably over like 50 to 60 event emitters, and they weren't using any Angular functionality whatsoever. And it's always tough because you're with the client and you're like, okay, this is fixable, but we're probably going to have to, completely take this apart, put it back together. And I don't know. That's about when Zach came in and saved our butts. And that's about the time I really learned about how powerful Angular services and things and stuff are.
Yeah.
That was super cool. That totally, I was like, oh man, we're going to have to bust this into 1 million widgets. We're going to have to, do a ton of complicated stuff. And Zach was like, or you can just build an Angular service. I was like, what? What are you talking about?
I remember I came in and I was like, because I could tell Bryce knew what he was doing. And I was like, this is crazy though, right? Like, what are we doing here? Like, what's happening? He's like, I don't, well, here's where we are. Yep. And we ended up, I think we spent like a weekend converting the entire thing from event-based to service-based. And all of a sudden, like we'd go from like getting an issue and it'd take hours to, you'd fix it in minutes, no problem.
Yeah. Separation of concerns and all that. It was, and not to mention the page itself ran, it was night and day faster. It was, oh my goodness, like so much stuff. It was a really cool app by the end of it. You could do some really, really cool stuff, but
so it's funny that you guys, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to end it with, so definitely to John's point, you should know the power of the tool you're working with, because, it can really, save your butt.
Yeah. You talk about emitters. I have never been a fan of noisy widgets, and so I always kind of tapped them onto the root scope, just said, here, I'll just create a new property on the root scope to handle what I was trying to broadcast. And then just recently I came across something ServiceNow was suggesting in their best practices, that the pub sub service. And I was like, what is this? And so now I start toying around with that. And I'm like, ooh, this is kind of nifty. Because it hushes things down, and it only specific things are talking to each other, and it doesn't actually affect anything else.
Yeah.
And so it's funny that you bring that up.
Angular services, I mean, depending on what you're trying to do, I like them as well too, because you can put them in just the widgets that you want to be able to talk to each other. Kind of gives them a shared global scope without having to go straight to that root scope.
Yeah.
But there are things I've found super powerful in the root scope. So one thing I've done on a recent project is in the header widget of a portal, I'll create in the server script a method for calling an air modal or something I want to be global, and just name it like .air or something out of the root scope. And then from any widget, you can just be like root scope.air function. And then if you want to change that global functionality anywhere, you change it in the header or whatever, and you can make it configurable and lots of stuff you can do. So.
Nice.
All right, Jon, summarize for us what out of the box means after talking it through.
I have so many things floating through my head about that because, from my, I spend, obviously I spend a lot of time in Portal. So the projects I work on, when they say out of box, to me really just means skinning, right? I shouldn't have to do anything to the widget other than change the look and feel. And now I've been on, and I wanted to bring this up earlier. I think a big point to that is, so with Cask, we have a design team that we work, as Portal guy, I work hand in hand with. And if the design person that is on the project knows ServiceNow well enough, we mesh really well on what out of box is. We're just skinning, and they know enough to know what can be done. And so that project works really well. When you don't have that cohesiveness on a project, things can get a little squirrely because designs can be pie in the sky, and you're like, yeah, that's not going to be. I'd have to clone the widget to make that happen, or I'm going to have to customize the widget. And so, to me, again, out of box for Portal projects specifically is just skin. It's just the look and feel. I don't have to change anything on a widget, and that's an out of box Portal project. And that could include, if I do have to do some extending in script includes, that I think that's okay too. But I really shouldn't have to do. The problem with that though is that would necessitate me doing something to the widget, and so I that's probably not a good area to go down. But I think the root of it is just skinning widgets and portals and themes. CSS really is the minimum, or what you're going to end up doing.
Yeah.
What about you, Zach? Summary of what out of the box means to you now.
Oh, that's a good summary.
Where's the spotlight? Put it on him.
Yeah.
What it really boils down to is easily maintainable.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because I think you establish principles on like what is out of box. Like, we will not write some crazy scripts that delete users for no reason. Like, there's a principle. Like, we don't do certain things, and we do certain things because we know they won't be an impact. And then I think on the negotiation and the stuff that you have to have conversations about, maybe that's what you call, all right, I'm getting away from out of the box. So the stuff you can do without any concern, I'd say that keeps you in the box. And as soon as you have to start having conversations about it as to like, is the business value justified? You're moving out of the box.
That's a really good summary too. Bryce, what you got for us?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what both Jon and Zach have said for sure. I think as a philosophy, out of the box, means adding functionality more than changing functionality. So, using those extensions, using those configurations and stuff as much as you possibly can is what that means. It also means really knowing, whatever application you're using or trying to do, so that you are having best practices when you do end up extending stuff is super important. So a lot of times out of the box is like supposed to be sent as, it's easy mode, it's just out of the box is kind of what you think when you hear it, but there's actually a lot you have to know, to stay within the box. It's not as easy as just not doing anything wrong. You got to also know how to do things right.
Yeah, I think ServiceNow uses the term baseline sometimes, but like you got to know what's in the box in order to determine what's out of the box.
Yeah, no, I mean that's true. That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this. And if you liked any of this content, like or subscribe. Feel free to find Bryce or Zach on LinkedIn, or track them down somehow.
Yeah, definitely. I love meeting new people and talking to new people. And honestly, it was awesome being here. So I'd love if you guys are doing something again, especially anything portal related. Think of me.
Awesome.
So Dorian, it sounds like he wants to be on again.
Yeah, Zach doesn't. Zach's like, nope, I'm good.
I'll come back. I think this is my first time on one of these, so this is pretty
Same
cool.
here.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, they're fun.
It's the great host. The great host.
We'll give me a clap and then we'll call it.